Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 236 based on novel. So let's start. Huiyuhao didn't trigger ice explosion, because now wasn't a good time to do that. This soul tool front soul tools were very advanced, and destroying one would be a sizable loss. Huiyuhao didn't know how the Doling Empire's royal palace was doing, but he would still attempt to reduce losses as much as possible. He took a step out and vanished into the soul tool front. He was 200 meters away when he reappeared, next to an enormous soul tool inside the front. Someone was just dashing out from this large soul tool right at this moment. He saw Huiyuhao and he was momentarily stunned before he raised his hand and fired a soul ray at him. This person was the soul tool front's strongest individual, a Class 8 soul engineer. Huiyuhao grunted coldly. He didn't care about the Class 8 soul ray, and a circle of blue light rippled on his icy war god's armor before the soul ray's destructiveness was completely dispelled. Huiyuhao pushed out with his right hand, and dark golden light sliced across the sky like a rainbow as it immediately covered the Class 8 soul engineer's body. Golden light glowed as an invincible barrier appeared. Class 8 soul engineers had many different ways to protect themselves, and this soul engineer was no exception. Even though he couldn't tell who Huiyuhao was, his status in the Sun Moon Empire meant he had seen human-shaped soul tools before. The person before him was radiating an intimidating and magnificent aura, and was someone that he absolutely couldn't fight against. He activated his invincible barrier, and then activated his soul thruster at his chest before his body bolted backward. He wanted to run. It was a pity, because his Class 7 invincible barrier that he had always been proud of dropped to the ground in the next moment. The invincible barrier's defenses were excellent, but a tremendous force still smashed it heavily to the ground. 5 shocking cracks appeared on the barrier's surface, like it could shatter at any moment. 5 chilly waves coursed in from those cracks, and the Class 8 soul engineer hurriedly activated another protective soul barrier. Unfortunately, Huiyuhao wouldn't give him another chance. Huiyuhao tapped his foot on the ground and appeared in front of that invincible barrier. He pressed his left hand simply on the barrier's surface before he turned and left. The golden barrier immediately turned icy blue, and the person holding the invincible barrier had become completely motionless. He had become a statue of ice. Empress Palm, snowless glacier. Not even an invincible barrier could block snowless glacier's extreme chills. Huiyuhao's ultimate ice was at an unrivaled standard after obtaining his second soul core, and his Empress Palm resembled the Snow Empress Glory during her strongest days. Huiyuhao's spiritual detection covered the entire soul tool front, and he didn't discover any other living people. He swiftly reached the main control platform and withdrew his ultimate ice's chill at the same time. Huiyuhao opened the soul protective barrier and allowed his companions to enter from outside. Third senior brother, you guys will remain here and guard this soul tool front. Activate the linked defensive barrier and wait for my return. You're coming with me, Wutong. We'll take a look at Doling City. The Sun Moon Empire has deployed 2 soul engineer legions to ambush the city, and I'm afraid they are already in a dire situation. Huiyuhao grabbed Tang Wutong's hand as he quickly finished his speech and soared into the sky towards Doling City. Tang Wutong was the first person to feel something different as they held hands. She realized to her surprise that her soul power couldn't fuse with Huiyuhao's soul power like before to form Haodong power. Huiyuhao's soul power seemed to become solid, and didn't allow her soul power to enter. Huiyuhao controlled his flight toward Doling City as he explained his soul power's current situation to her. Tang Wutong frowned. That means I have to obtain my yin-yang complement soul core before I can use Haodong power with you again. Huiyuhao shook his head. I don't know. I'm the first human to possess a second soul core through the yin-yang complement method, after all. We can slowly try in the future to see if you can adjust so that our martial souls can fuse again. I think we can still use our martial soul fusion skills. Yes. Now clearly wasn't the time to discuss this question, as they arrived above Lingdo City as they spoke. There were fires everywhere inside the city, especially toward the city's central areas. Flames burned into the sky as dense smoke covered everything, and nothing could be seen, Hui Yuhao's heart sank. Even though he couldn't see, he could still sense with his spiritual detection. There was an enormous crater that was more than 300 meters in diameter, and it was almost 50 meters deep. All the structures around that crater had been reduced to rubble and dust, and judging from the buildings around it, that area was likely to have been Doling City's royal palace. The Sun Moon Empire is so cruel. The evil tyrant and Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer legions are so cruel. Since they are so cruel, don't blame me for not being nice. Hui Yuhao's spiritual power erupted. His spiritual detection had been covering the city when he was breaking through that soul tool front, and all of the Soul Engineer Legion's members were within his detection range. These Soul Engineers still didn't know that their soul tool front at the back had been breached, and they were still wreaking havoc within Doling City. Doling City's surviving forces were almost completely wiped out. The thing that had bombarded the royal palace was undoubtedly a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell, and those two Soul Engineer legions were currently assaulting the city without any restraint. They were particularly searching for soul masters and soul engineers to attack. However, they weren't careless, even though they were very outrageous. The soul engineers formed groups of 10 and moved together, and anybody who had the guts to resist were attacked with their full strength at once and killed. The Soul Engineer legions were also attacking several large buildings to destroy them and cause chaos. Doling City's city defense army wasn't small, but there were very few who were considered formidable. The Doling Empire's elite soul masters had all traveled toward Shrek City, while most of their powerful individuals had been inside the royal palace, which had been blown up, and the city had sustained heavy losses. How could they gather to fight against two Soul Engineer legions at a time like this? It seemed like the Imperial Dragon and Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer legions had been holding back for quite some time. They had had to search for the blind spots in the Doling Empire's surveillance and infiltrate the Empire's territory. They didn't dare to cross any large cities, so they had to proceed through the wilderness and suburbs. They used their surveillance soul tools to scout ahead bit by bit, and it was a long and hard journey to reach Doling City. Today was the day that they had decided to launch an offensive. If Hui Yuhao had been later by another 2 hours, these two Soul Engineer legions would probably have already disappeared after their feat. Hui Yuhao stretched out his spiritual power as he pulled Tang Wutong and disappeared into the smoke. He was using imitation, and he wasn't afraid of being discovered at all. A team of Soul Engineers swiftly crossed in front of them, and Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong followed them on a whim. These Soul Engineers belonged to the Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion. This legion was the fastest among the 4 beast-ranked legions, and Hui Yuhao hated them the most, because they had been the ones who had surrounded and attacked him and Wang Chua. Wang Chua probably wouldn't have had to sacrifice herself if not for this legion. Hui Yuhao was eager because of his hatred and resentment. He didn't wait for long before he waved his right hand, and a giant dark golden terraclaw 100 meters long cut across the sky. These Soul Engineers didn't react at all before the large claw slashed through them. They all had at least 4 soul rings, and were all equipped with automatic defensive soul tools. However, their cultivations were too low. How could these 4-ringed and 5-ringed Soul Engineers do anything against a titled Dolor without linked soul tools? The smoke became Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's best cover. 10 Soul Engineers perished from a single successful strike, and Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong started searching for the next group of Soul Engineers along the periphery. These 2 beast-ranked Legion Soul Engineers were still formidable. If they could gather and unleash their linked offensive soul tools, Hui Yuhao would still have to tuck tail and run, even with his current cultivation. But they were too arrogant. They had already taken down Doling City, and they had already worked together to take out almost all of their strongest individuals. 7 titled Dolor had perished under their linked offensive soul tools, and only then did they disperse to sweep the battlefield. These Soul Engineers had storage-type soul tools, and this was the Doling Empire's capital city. How could they not pillage? Greed was a sin, and it was because of greed that they didn't know that they had become the hunted. Hui Yuhao's spiritual detection was all too effective at a time like this. He didn't touch the Soul Engineers who had more than 7 soul rings, but he specifically went for relatively weaker Soul Engineers. Hui Yuhao wanted to kill them with one hit, so he didn't give his opponents any chance to notify their companions. Tang Wutong didn't do anything from the beginning to the end, whether Hui Yuhao used his dark golden terror claws or spiritual blast. Hui Yuhao killed more than 200 soul engineers in a short while. The beast-ranked soul engineer legions were very strict in picking soul engineers. These soul engineers had to be strong enough, they had to be young, and they had to have potential. They had to go through tough training before they were cherry-picked and enlisted. Every beast-ranked soul engineer legion officially consisted of 300 people. Hui Yuhao had now dealt with more than half of a soul engineer legion, in addition to those 50 back at the soul tool front. The Imperial Dragon and Evil Tyrant soul engineer legions had lost about half of their initial number. But it was in this moment that both soul engineer legions leaders finally realized that something wasn't right, because they couldn't contact many of their subordinates. They were still pillaging excitedly before this, but the legion itself wasn't huge, and there were only so many people. They were also in enemy territory, so they were still comparatively careful. They would communicate with every small team leader after a period of time to confirm everyone's locations. But when they were establishing communication once more, they realized to their surprise that many small teams weren't responding, like they had gone missing just like that. The two Soul Engineer Legion's leaders were running scared. They immediately gave the order to gather in the sky and take a roll call. Doling City was in ruins. The city defense army was still blindly defending themselves against the Soul Engineer Legion's attacks, and the city was full of agonizing cries and chaos. Citizens were holed up in their houses, and nobody knew when a stationary soul cannon shell would land in their homes. Their walls didn't give them any security at all. The attack suddenly stopped at this moment. Shadows began flying high into the sky one after another, and they were evidently gathering. "I think they've realized," Tang Wutong whispered in Hui Yuhao's ear. Hui Yuhao scoffed and said, "A Soul Engineer Legion together is an extremely formidable entity, but if they are separated, they will die. The Sun Moon Empire's Soul Engineer Legions have won too many victories, that's the reason they are so arrogant, and this hubris is an important reason why they are losing their lives. Let's go. We'll obliterate them so that we can avenge the Doling Empire's dead." Hui Yuhao grasped Tang Wutong's hand and drifted upward as he spoke before they bolted into the air like a flash of lightning. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong became almost entirely like air with imitation covering them, and they arrived at the Soul Engineers assembly point quicker than the Soul Engineers themselves. Hui Yuhao could see 6 Soul Engineers hovering in midair with one look. According to the Sun Moon Empire's beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legion's organizational structure, every Soul Engineer Legion had 3 Legion commanders, 1 head commander and 2 vice commanders. These few should be their commanders. There were 2 head commanders, who were both Class 9 Soul Engineers, and there were 4 vice commanders, who were Class 8 Soul Engineers. Hui Yuhao had already dealt with another Class 8 Soul Engineer back at the Soul Tool front. These 2 Soul Engineer Legions had sent their best forces to participate in this operation. Hui Yuhao held Tang Wutong's hand and waited quietly. There were more Soul Engineers flying up from below at this moment, and they were all gathering at their assembly point. Hui Yuhao didn't move, and he just waited quietly with Tang Wutong not far from those commanders. The 6 commanders' expressions were becoming increasingly darker. There was no way they couldn't, because there were far too few flying up from below. Furthermore, they were mostly missing entire small teams. These small teams didn't even communicate at all. The Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion's commander was called Xie Xianchen, and he was replacing the Manic Bull Dolor, Wang Yiheng. He was initially vice commander before the Tang sect dealt with Wang Yiheng, and was then promoted to head commander. His strength was still comparatively lower than the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion's commander. "Old Shu, something doesn't seem right. We might be in trouble. Why are we missing so many people?" The person he referred to as Old Shu was the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion's head commander, Shu Qianyuan. He belonged to the royal family, and the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion was under many of the royal family members' control. They weren't entirely obedient to the Emperor's authority, and this legion could be considered one of the strongest forces that the royal family controlled. Shu Qianyuan was also part of the royal family, and he should be considered Shu Qianran's older cousin in terms of seniority. But the truth was, he was much older than Shu Qianran was, and his status was one of the highest among the Sun Moon Empire's royal family. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to command the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion. The Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion's strength was second only to the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Legion. Their names were very similar, but they represented very different strengths. The royal family was especially formidable when they came together for certain designations, such as when the many princes were vying for the throne. However, the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion had always been rather neutral. They didn't lean toward any prince, and their neutrality was the reason for their continued existence. They only served the royal family, and furthered their needs. Yes, something's wrong. Why are we missing so many people? Can it be because those little bastards are pillaging until they've forgotten about discipline? Xu Qianyuan himself found that a little hard to believe when he spoke of that possibility. Xie Xianchen forced a laugh and said, "That's not quite possible, is it? Even if they are off pillaging, it's not possible that we can't communicate with them. The small team leaders can't be so short-sighted." Xu Qianyuan nodded as he lowered his voice and said, "If nobody else assembles, we will activate our linked defensive barrier and retreat. We've achieved our goal, anyway." Xie Xianchen hesitated, then said, "But we're missing so many brothers." Xu Qianyuan gritted his teeth and replied, "What can we do if our enemy has powerful individuals hidden within the city? This is the Doling Empire's capital city, and I believe news of this ambush has already been sent out. Reinforcements will arrive very soon. Since we have accomplished our mission and we can't afford to deal with anything else, we'll retreat before considering other things. Safety comes first." All right. Even though they were both commanders of beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legions, the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion's commander, Xu Qianyuan, was the leader of this operation. Xie Xianchen felt bad about his subordinates, but he had to be decisive at a time like this. More and more Soul Engineers began gathering around them. Xu Qianyuan suddenly developed a strange sensation at this moment, and Xie Xianchen felt the same way. They were both Class 9 Soul Engineers, and they had to be one of the better ones among their fellows for them to become commanders of beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legions. "Careful," Xie Xianchen growled before he swung his right hand, and a brilliant silver warhammer suddenly appeared in his grip before it blasted out into some empty space. "Eh?" A faint exclamation could be heard as countless small golden hammers erupted from nothingness and expanded in all directions. Xie Xuanchen's hammer was very effective. The silver light diluted some of the golden light when the golden light erupted, but that was it. Xie Xianchen and Xu Qianyuan grunted before they flew backwards, and blood ran down their mouths and noses. The strength of the two beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legion's commanders were displayed at a time like this. In that moment when the golden light that had appeared out of nowhere erupted, both Xie Xianchen and Xu Qianyuan patted their chests at almost the same time. A formidable strength exploded forth from their human-shaped soul tools, and tremendous propulsion forces blasted out in circles. These propulsion forces didn't just propel them out like an arrow, but also propelled their vice-commanders and the other Soul Engineers who had just assembled around them toward the periphery. They were like snowflakes and flowers dancing through the sky for a moment. Mantra amidst the void, spiritual tempest. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's figures appeared from the air. That previous attack was Spiritual Tempest, one of their formidable martial soul fusion skills. However, not even Hui Yuhao had expected the Sun Moon Empire's powerful individuals to react so quickly. They chose the best method to deal with Spiritual Tempest. The two commanders had erupted with powerful propulsion forces that even Tang Wutong and he were affected by to a certain extent. The other 300 Soul Engineers also instantly dispersed, and most of them avoided Spiritual Tempest's area of effect. But most didn't mean all of them, and the heads of some 30-odd Soul Engineers closest to Spiritual Tempest's epicenter exploded in the air. Blood spurted from the tops of their heads as their corpses plummeted toward the ground. The four vice-commanders were stunned from that formidable spiritual shock, but Xu Qianyuan and Xie Xianchen weren't. Their human-shaped soul tools were Class 9 soul tools, which were equipped with strong defensive capabilities. Furthermore, individuals at their level were undoubtedly equipped with soul tools that could protect them against spiritual attacks. Therefore, even though they took the brunt of the attack and also felt dizzy, They sacrificed two of their precious defensive soul tools meant for spiritual attacks before they forcibly protected themselves against Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's spiritual tempest. Hui Yuhao trained his eyes on Xie Xianchen, especially that silver hammer in his hands. That silver hammer wasn't a soul tool. Instead, it was a martial soul. A Class 9 soul engineer had actually used his martial soul at such a crucial moment, and this meant that Xie Xianchen wasn't just a soul engineer. He was a true title Doling at the same time. There are truly many powerful individuals hidden within the Sun Moon Empire. But Hui Yuhao didn't stop. He was faced with hundreds of soul engineers, and any pause meant that his enemies would team up against him. He took this opportunity when both soul engineer legions were in disarray, and he and Tang Wutong pounced at Xie Xianchen with a flash. The stronger their opponent, the quicker they had to destroy them. Furthermore, these two commanders were very effective at commanding their soul engineer legions. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong had to kill them first before they could come closer to destroying these two soul engineer legions. Xie Xianchen could tell that he was Hui Yuhao's target when he caught the look in his eyes. Silver light emerged from his body as he released a Class 9 protective barrier. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong arrived in a flash. A bright and crisp dragon roar rang out from Tang Wutong's body as she punched at Xie Xianchen's barrier, while Hui Yuhao pushed out with his left hand. Their attack seemed simple and unassuming, but Xie Xianchen's senses saved him once more in that moment. He could feel the terrifying power contained in that fist and palm. They seemed so simple, but they made him feel like his life was in danger. Xie Xianchen didn't hesitate. Light radiated from his body as a crystal suddenly appeared in his hands. This crystal was oval, and about the size of an infant's head. There were many intricate and sophisticated carvings on its surface, and it emanated majesty from the moment it appeared. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's palm and fist landed on his soul protective barrier at almost the same time. Frightening spiritual power and soul power combined as an ear-piercing sound rang from the Class 9 protective barrier. Cracks appeared in the crystal, and terrifying chills and the domineering aura of Tang Wutong's radiant dragon butterfly flooded into them. Right at this moment, that oval crystal erupted with a layer of brilliant golden light. A formidable propulsion force forcibly pushed Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong backward, and that wasn't all. The crystal stone covered Xie Xianchen's body with a layer of golden light that was shaped like an eggshell. Xu Qianyuan's eyes were overcome with greed when he saw the crystal stone in Xie Xianchen's hands. Of course he knew what that was. That was a priceless treasure for all soul engineers, even for Class 9 soul engineers. What is that? Hui Yuhao was taken aback. His ultimate ice was very penetrative, and after he gained his second soul core through the yin-yang complement method, normal protective barriers couldn't block his snowless glacier. But in that moment, Xie Xianchen's defensive capabilities repelled his ultimate ice, and also produced such forceful propulsions. That wasn't something that typical soul tools could achieve. What exactly was in his hands? Linked ring, lock on. Xie Xianchen roared hysterically. It seemed like he had defended himself against Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's attack casually, but only he knew what was happening to him. If not for that strange eggshell in his hands, Hui Yuhao's ultimate ice would have probably frozen him solid. Even though he probably wouldn't die, his opponent's onslaught wouldn't just stop with that. He would undoubtedly meet his demise if his opponents were allowed to chain their attacks. Even though it hadn't been long since he took over as the Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion's commander, his reputation and influence within his legion were still relatively high. The Evil Eye Tyrant Legion's remaining Soul Engineers quickly activated their linked soul tools as he roared his command. This linked ring was specifically meant to deal with enemies who had broken through to their most important areas. Not even Hui Yuhao could deny that the Sun Moon Empire was still far ahead in terms of training and commanding their Soul Engineer legions. Circles of blue light glowed one after another, and swiftly formed a circle as intense soul power undulations appeared. Linked ring, defensive barrier. Xu Qianyuan's reaction speed wasn't slow either. He gave his order as soon as was possible. The Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion's quality was the highest among the 4 beast-ranked legions, and they moved equally swiftly. Xu Qianyuan's goal was simple: he wanted to surround Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong. With their linked defense and offense, How could they not kill their opponents with over 300 Soul Engineers working together, no matter how formidable their opponents were? Hui Yuhao heaved a sigh inside. These beast-ranked Soul Engineer legions are indeed difficult to deal with. If not for those Soul Engineers that we killed in the chaos before this, we might not have had a chance. The Doling Empire's royal palace was in an irreversible situation. However, Hui Yuhao had to find some way to obliterate these two beast-ranked Soul Engineer legions when they were detached from the main army, no matter what. But it was evident that he couldn't do so now. Even Ultimate Dolor had to avoid two Soul Engineer legions who had completed their link-up. A large black door appeared. Hui Yuhao no longer needed any incantations to open a single spectral gate, and he could almost do so immediately. Hui Yuhao held Tang Wutong's hand as they disappeared into the spectral gate with a flash. They could be chased by linked attacks if they ran away, while running out of the linked defense may not be completely safe. Any kind of concealment soul skills would be futile if those linked attacks were executed over an area. But what Hui Yuhao did, when he escaped into another plane, not even the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Legion could do anything to them, not to mention these two Soul Engineer Legions. Xie Xianchen flew next to Xu Tianyuan with a tinge of fear in his heart as he wiped cold sweat from his forehead. That was close. They are extremely powerful, and what's more frightening is that they have concealment abilities, Xie Xianchen said to Xu Tianyuan. Xu Tianyuan glanced at the oval crystal in his Xie Xuanchen's hand. He frowned and said, I'm more worried about that escape ability that they just displayed. Their auras vanished into thin air. Can that be spatial power? But only Ultimate Dolor can master spatial power. Since when has the Doling Empire possessed such formidable individuals? Xie Xianchen forced a laugh. Let's hurry and retreat. No matter where these two are from, it appears that our brothers we've lost contact with have met their demise. We should hurry back to the Soul Tool front, then we can pack up and leave. Ensure that everyone maintains the linked defense so that we can avoid being ambushed again. We have to leave as quickly as possible. Yes, Xu Tianyuan nodded understandingly. They were deep behind enemy lines all by themselves, after all. If they were on the battlefield at the front lines, even if their enemies were even more powerful, they wouldn't be afraid because of their Soul Engineer Legion's combined strength. However, there were two incredibly strong individuals hiding near them, and they felt like they had thorns in their backs. They could be ambushed at any moment, so retreating back into the Sun Moon Empire's territory was the best solution. They had sustained severe losses on this mission, but they had accomplished their mission. They had still managed to do something very laudable. The two Class 9 Soul Engineers discussed logistics for a moment before they led their legions back toward their Soul Tool front. Even though they were already prepared to lose their Soul Tool front from the beginning, the Doling Empire's resistance was much weaker than they had imagined, judging from their current situation. A single Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell had immediately dealt with the entire royal palace, and if not for those two powerful people who had appeared afterwards, their two legions would be almost perfectly victorious. The two Soul Engineer legions changed formations once more. This time, they tried to keep some space between them, because the two commanders had seen how powerful Hui Yuhao's group attacks were from his spiritual tempest. Therefore, they maintained their ring-shaped formation, but they formed two rings, with one larger than the other. The Evil Eye Tyrant Legion was outside, while the Imperial Dragon Legion was inside. The Evil Eye Tyrant Legion was responsible for maintaining their linked defenses, while the Imperial Dragon Legion would rest inside. They could switch to maintain their defenses like that, and if they ran into anything, a single Soul Engineer Legion was sufficient for defense. The other legion would augment their defenses, and it could also turn defense into offense. If they didn't run into any more enemies, they could proceed at a steady pace by switching around. They were naturally not afraid of running into the Doling Empire's forces. Unless the Doling Empire concentrated all their Soul Masters to surround and attack them, they probably didn't have a chance at all. The Empire's elite forces had all gone to Shrek City, so these two Soul Engineer Legions' combined strength was almost invincible. The two Legion commanders were almost perfect in their command of their respective Soul Engineer Legions, but their faces were so dark that it was frightening when they returned to their Soul Tool front. The Soul Tool front's defenses were still open, but they couldn't communicate with anybody inside. Afterwards, they witnessed the Seoul Tool Front's linked offensive Seoul Tools charging up. They were aimed directly at them. But what could they do? Their opponents had actually taken over their Seoul Tool Front beforehand, which completely exceeded their expectations. They were deep behind enemy lines, and they didn't even have any time to think. They turned to run, and flew toward the Sun Moon Empire as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, they didn't know that there was barely anybody inside the Seoul Tool Front. They were using the Seoul Tool Front Seoul Power Reserves to activate its linked defensive and offensive Seoul Tools, which came from milk bottles. They couldn't have kept that up for long. If these two Seoul Engineer Legions kept their distance and maintained a continuous onslaught, perhaps they would sustain some losses, but taking back their Seoul Tool Front would be relatively easy. But just as when Hui Yuhao was faced with Juzi, when he clearly knew that her target wasn't Shrek City still couldn't reduce their vigilance and alertness. This was the same reason why these two Seoul Engineer Legions couldn't stay for any longer despite knowing that the Seoul Engineers inside that Seoul Tool Front weren't strong. Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong's ambush had left a deep shadow in their hearts. The two legions hadn't flown away for long when Hui Yuhao and Tang Wutong appeared outside the Seoul Tool Front. They rendezvoused with their companions before Hui Yuhao immediately found Shu Sanxia. Sanxia, Doling City's situation isn't great. The city has suffered a destructive onslaught, and the royal palace is completely destroyed. I don't know if anybody from the royal family is still alive. Let's do it this way. You guys will stay here and proceed toward Doling City. Reveal our identities as Shrek Academy's members, help them restore order, and search for any members of the royal family who are still alive. Wutong and I will pursue those two Seoul Engineer Legions. I don't believe they can fly all the way back to the Sun Moon Empire. They will have to rest along the way, and that will be our chance. We will take this opportunity when they are separated to try and keep these two legions in the Doling Empire forever. We will avenge the Doling Empire's royal family. Shu Sanxia nodded and said, "All right, then go. Leave Doling City to us." "You're right, but..." Shu Sanxia heaved a sigh inside, and everything he could say was too late. The Sun Moon Empire was too cunning. They didn't just target the Doling Empire, they directly executed an assassination mission against the Doling Empire's royal palace. Their formidable Seoul Engineer Legions could fully unleash their frightening offensive capabilities in a skirmish like this. If the Star Luo Empire ran into a similar situation, they probably wouldn't do any better than the Doling Empire had. Ultimately, they lost on surveillance and intelligence. This video will end here.